Alright, here we go. Welcome back to the Build Your Own BPOS course. Really starting to get into some higher level topics now, and so this one may not necessarily be for you. Just depends on your venue and the type of table service that is common in your venue, and if you have table service at all, that is. Because we've got another lesson on deck here that is related to table service, but focusing on split tables. You may remember very briefly touching on split tables in the table service lesson earlier in the course, but maybe not, because if I remember correctly, we did just barely mention split tables and then sort of moved on. But yeah, this and the next few lessons are all going to be on split tables. However, they will be a bit on the shorter side, each one. You can probably see by however long this video ends up being, but I imagine it will be on the shorter end. This one in particular is going to cover us for all of the split table setups and configurations, and then we will have some, I'm thinking at least 2, but there may be more, videos that will follow this one, and in those ones we will run through some different split table workflows. The reason that we'll have separate lessons for those is because the functionality and workflows will vary depending on the system configuration. So we'll see those system configurations today as a whole, and then in the following ones, each one will show those configurations being set up, how the system's been configured, and then we'll get into SmartPOS demos based on those configurations. So just to give you an idea there of what to expect between this lesson and the ones that will come after it. But yeah, before we can do that, like I said, we will be kicking off things here with just a general overview of all of the settings that we have, which are related to split tables. There's no agenda necessarily for this lesson other than the timestamps that I will have put on the screen here. So let's just jump into back office and get started. And actually, before we get into any of the configurations, let me just quickly explain to you what split tables, sometimes they're referred to as split bills, but what they actually are. So it's really simple. A common scenario would be something where one table might have 3 guests that are all dining together, and this is a standard table service environment. So it's different from the bistro environment from the last lesson if you have bistro in your venue and you watch that lesson. But anyway, in this, so it's a standard table service environment, but each of those 3 guests that are sitting at the table together will ask for a separate bill with only their items on it, or portions of items that maybe they've shared, and then those splits can be paid for individually. There are certainly some regions around the world where this type of thing is very common, and other places where it is not common at all. So some of you may be quite familiar, but others may just be hearing about this style or type of table service for the first time today. Regardless, setting up your database to cater for and use split table functionality is relatively easy. However, there are some different ways that the system can be configured, which will alter the workflows in SmartPOS. So as I mentioned a minute ago, what we'll be doing in this lesson is just highlighting all of the setups throughout the system that are in some way, shape, or form involved or related to splits. So all of that being said, arguably the best place to start is going to be in global settings. Now I say arguably because the one setting here, which is related to splits, which is on the flags tab by the way, could very well be the last split bill setting that we look at or discuss, but since it's at the global level and therefore will affect the entire organization, probably is a good idea to consider it first. But anyway, it is going to be this flag here, tables open directly into splits. That's just in this main section. If you can't find it, it's sort of about halfway through, or halfway down the list here. What this will do, this might make more sense later, which is one of the reasons I said this is arguably the right setting to start with. But for any table that's already been started, has then been split, and is saved, when that table is reopened, it will open directly into the split bill screen. Hence the name here, tables open directly into splits. So again, that's if this flag is on, which will make the workflow and process more efficient for operators in SmartPOS. If it's off, however, the table will open like it normally would, and the operator would then need to use a till function button to manually go into the split bill screen. But like I said, that will make more sense possibly later in this lesson, but definitely at least when we start going through demonstrations in the next lesson. Actually, what I might do is I'll drop in an image of a split table here in the video when I'm editing this lesson so that you can at least see what it will look like or what a split table will look like in SmartPOS for now. But essentially each individual person, or maybe separate couples or whatever the case may be, but there's separate bills that are on this one single table. Each of those will have their own table number subset that'll show on the screen. So for example, the example that I'll put on the screen, we'll say it'll be for table 3, and then the splits could be 3, 1, 3, 2, so on and so forth. Then for each of those subsets, they will have their own separate line items and totals, all the products that they have ordered. Now there's also an option to share products, so bottles of wine, for example, or maybe a big charcuterie board or something like that. And then portions of that can be shared amongst the different splits too, but we'll see more about that later, and certainly when we get into demonstrations in the following lessons. Anyway, off on a bit of a tangent there, but like I said, I will have put an image on the screen here with an example, and I will fade that out now. Cool, and we will close our global settings. We'll move on to our venue level settings. Of course, there are some related settings on the tables tab, but before we get there, there is a lone flag on the flags tab, and it is in the till operation section, and it is called hide base split table. So what this will do, I'll bring up the image of the split table again here so you can see. If this flag is on for a venue, the base table, the one that will say something like, I believe it says unpaid table number, maybe something, a couple words that I've got off in there, but that particular table, that base table, will be hidden, hence the name here, hide base split table. And so only the splits themselves will be shown in that case. Now we'll see the difference in workflows, whether that's off or on, when we get into the demos next time. But another very important thing to note about this flag though is that even if that global flag for opening tables directly into splits is off, if this flag is on for a venue, split tables will open directly into splits in that venue. So again, we'll check out the workflows and the differences there with whether one of those flags is off or on and the other one's off or on, so on and so forth, in the next lesson, but just wanted to point these flags out for now and explain that difference there, that if the global flag is off and this one's on for a venue, tables will still open directly into splits in the venue. Cool, but yeah, like I said, just the one flag here on this tab that's related to splits. Now if we do check out the tables tab though, there are some flags in this table groups section that will have an effect on split table functionality and workflows. Now we have looked at all these flags in the past on our table service lesson, so this will be a bit of a refresh, but I'll also explain how they can come into play for split tables. So the first one is going to be our ask number guests flag. So as we know from that table service lesson, when that flag is on for a table group, then operators are going to be prompted to enter the number of guests for a new table when they start a new table. Now that can be very helpful for a number of reasons. We saw a few lessons back how that could factor into applying an automatic service charge if there's over a certain number of guests at a table, and particularly for split tables, the number that's been entered, for example, let's say there's 4 guests at the table, that number can be used to automatically create the split bills for the table based on that number. So another way of making things more efficient for operators by having things like that turned on. And better yet, along with that, we might also want to turn on the ask seat flag. You might remember from the table service lesson that that'll prompt operators to enter the seat number for each item that's being ordered. Lastly, if we scroll over, all the way over, we have our ask splits as guests flag. Now what that'll do, depending on how the rest of the system is set up and therefore the workflow that we follow, but what it'll do is if an operator enters the guest count first and then uses a till function to go into splits, they will have the option to split the table based on the number of guests that were entered. So again, simplifying the workflow, more operational efficiency. Now you may also remember from the table service lesson that the ask splits as guest flag cannot be enabled, cannot be turned on at all, unless the ask number of guest flag is also turned on for that table group. So I believe I've showed this in the past, but if we turn that off, this will actually not be able to be turned on. Only if we have it, the ask number of guest flag turned on, will we then be able to ask splits as that guest number. Cool. Yeah, that does it for the venue settings that are directly related to split tables. There's obviously other things that you may want to consider when setting up split table service and table service in general, but we've gone through all these settings in the past, so no need to revisit those. And there is nothing at the store level or at the workstation level that are specifically related to splits, so we don't need to go to these. I do just want to point out to keep in mind these receipt flags here. So these always print ones, just to consider those and how often receipts could be printing automatically with split tables, with them being saved and so forth. But yeah, cool. As far as venues, stores, and tills goes, that is really it. But we do still have our till functions to get to. So for these, and I'll just clarify before we get into these, that the panels and locations of all the till functions that we're looking at today are going to be templates and standard setups that are shipped with the software. Depending on how the system is configured, the panels can show in the function map dynamically based on where in the split table workflow we are. So as much as I say sometimes that till functions can be placed anywhere, and they can, but there's certain functions on the split table panels that should not be removed, and placing some of the split table till functions on other panels other than the panels that we'll look at in a moment might not make much sense to put them on different panels, and I'll explain why that is. And there's actually certain till functions that will not work at all unless they are on a particular panel. So as I said, yeah, the system can direct to the split table panels automatically and dynamically. But anyway, I should probably just show you what I'm talking about. So before we actually get to the split panels themselves, if we go to our table panel, a regular table panel, there it is. There is a till function in here. It is labeled as split ticket, but what this actually is our split table till function. We can see from the description here that this will initiate a split table. So this is where the system setups will affect the workflow. If we've got things configured to go into splits automatically and have the table group flags turned on to take us through to splits automatically, we might never actually need to use this till function. But to initiate a split table manually or to enter into splits manually, we can use this till function. Just depends on how the rest of the system is configured, but again, we'll get into those when we get into demonstrations over the upcoming lessons. You can see there's nothing else to configure here in the item, sub-item, and key fields. Now, I should mention, however the system is configured and regardless of the workflow that we take to get there, which we'll see the differences starting in the next lesson, but once we are in the split table window, I will drop the Smart Pause image in again here, and take note of the till function panel at the bottom, which will show automatically once we are in splits. So the till function panel that's showing on the map here on this image will show automatically when we are in a split table. Cool. I will fade that image away now. So that panel, while the system will direct to it whether it's on the function map or not, as with the bistro panel from that last lesson, it is recommended to add it to the function map. Of course, to the function map that's going to be added to the tills that are going to be used for split table service. Now we can see from the list here of the panels to add that there's two different panels that are related to splits. We have panel split table, and then if I scroll down, we have our panel split functions, and you'll see what's what in just a second. The one that's going to appear dynamically when we first go into the split screen, the one that we saw just a minute ago, is this split functions one. So as you could see in that image from SmartPause, and we can see it again here, it is a bit narrow and wide. It's just the 2x8 for our buttons here. And there's a bit of a mix here of functions that are specific to splits and some functions that are not specific to splits, some that we've actually seen before. We could obviously spend some time on here and explain each and every one of these till functions, but some of them, like the table transfer and the redeem voucher and these discount ones, for example, we have seen them before. But there are a couple that I will point out. We've got our transfer by seat, transfer quantity, and the share item. So these different transfer and share till functions here, these are specific to split tables. Now again, using these efficiently is going to depend on other setups, and that's where we might want to change things up a bit. But this, if I go back to this transfer by seat, this is, we can see, is a split transfer seat till function. If we go back so we can read that description, we can see that this will transfer all products sold to a specified seat number from one split bill to another split bill. And important to note, this is used only on the split table screen. So this can only be used on this till function when we are in splits. And then the one next to that, we have our split transfer specified quantity, which we can use to enter the quantity of a highlighted table product to transfer to another split bill. Again, this is only used on the split table screen. And then next to that, we have our split transfer share, which we can use to evenly split a highlighted table product across many other split bills, and again can only be used on the split table screen. Now aside from those three, we do have a couple of other split functions here in the tender and payment list. We have, wrong list. We have our, if I scroll up a bit, we have our transfer highlighted, and we have split transfer all. So depending on how your database is set up, you might want to swap some of these around. For example, let's say here in No Hats, No Stars, maybe we don't typically use seat numbers. So I might want to change the transfer, the split transfer seat till function to, let's say, the split transfer highlighted, and of course change the button text there. And there's actually another workflow that I'll show in the next lesson to move quantity of products from one split to another. So I'll change this one, rather than being transfer specified quantity, to transfer all. By the way, using some of these till functions will also depend on whether we're using the base table or hiding it, and whether we go directly into splits or not. But again, we'll get into those workflows in the follow-up lessons, and you'll see what's what. For now, we will just continue on. There is another split related function down here. If I scroll over so we can see it, yep, not that one. It is going to be this one. Oh, that's not what I wanted to show you either. We'll get to that in a second, but for now we'll stick with this print highlight split one, which we can see will print the split that is highlighted on the split screen. It's going to do exactly that. Rather than print the entire table, we can highlight a specific split from the table, and we can print just that. If maybe just one person at the table asks for their bill because they need to leave early or something like that, or when we come to the end of the dinner service and each individual person would like their own receipt printed out, we can do that for them. Cool. Lastly, on this panel, I clicked on it a minute ago, but we do have our close split button here, which is a split close screen, and we can see this will close the split table screen. Yeah, we'll do just that. It closes the split table screen that we saw in our image from earlier, and we'll exit out to the SmartPause main screen. Also, by the way, notice the description again for these, that this is only used on the split table screen. So yeah, that's it for that panel. Again, we have some other functions on here that we've seen in the past, and of course have our payment options here as well. Cool, but if we move on to the other split table panel, let me just add that to this function map as well. Again, this is one is just called panel split table. So this panel, I mentioned earlier that these panels will show dynamically, automatically, so on and so forth, however we want to describe that, depending on the portion of the split table workflow. So this panel will show once the table is split and we go into an individual split so that we can add products to it. So from that Smart Pause screen where we can see the split tables, obviously we can't add any products from that screen because the splits themselves are where the product key map would normally be. So we need to actually drill into one of those splits so that we can add products to them. So once we drill into one of those splits, we open that split up. This function map panel is what will show in the panel at the time. So you'll see what I mean when we get in the next lesson when we get into Smart Pause. But as you can see for now, with the exception of this return to split screen function that's here, none of the other functions on this panel are specific to splits. So because this is the panel that's going to show when we're in a split, we do still need to obviously access other till functions that we might need. Also, there's obviously a lot of extra button spaces left over here, so you might want to change some things around here, add some other panel selections or other individual functions that may be useful in your venue, for example. But yeah, we kind of have a bit of leeway here with what we can add and change. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are certain functions that we should not remove from these panels. One of those in particular is this return to split function. We do not want to remove this because that's how we're going to get back into the main split table screen so that we can select another split. So notice from the description for this, as I said, this function is typically used after products are entered. So the workflow, I'll explain it now, we'll see it in the next lesson. We split the tables, we go into the splits, we go into one of the splits, we can add whatever they're ordering, let's say a drink, a main, whatever the case may be. We use this till function to return to the split screen. We can then select the next split and proceed, so on and so forth. That's one of the workflows that we could get into that we will see. Cool, but that is, just a quick rundown overview of our split table panels and split table functions. Again, we'll see some of those in use when we get into demos coming up. And I should mention that in addition to the system setups determining workflows and so forth, some of the functions themselves aren't going to be necessary depending on how things are set up. And there are some more intuitive ways to transfer products between splits that we'll see as opposed to using some of these functions. So we've got different options depending on how things are configured. But anyway, before we do wrap this lesson up, there are, of course, some operator privileges that we should go over. It seems that there always are. Now, there's nothing that we haven't seen before for operator privileges because there are actually none that are specifically required for split tables. But as with bistro tables that we saw in the previous lesson, if you watched that one, there are some general tables flags here that will need to be on for split tables too. So our table sales, create new tables, table payments, close tables. The others are optional. Obviously, if waiter service is being used, then you'll want to turn on the waiter flags. But at a minimum for split table service, it's recommended that operators can, of course, access the table list, create new tables, process table payments, and close tables. Alright, well that is going to do it for this lesson. Again, as I mentioned, this was going to be on the shorter side because we'll be getting into the demos separately next time. I just wanted to go over the configurations and so forth today, show you what's what, and then next time I'll show you how the system has been configured, and then based on those configurations, the workflows that we would encounter in Smart Pause, and then we'll wrap that video. Again, that should be a short one as well, and then following that, we'll set up the system a bit differently. I'll show you how it's been set up for that video, and then we will run through the workflows that we'll encounter there, and we might have a third one, depends on the amount of demos and things that we can get to in the next two. But thank you very much for your time as always, and we'll see you next time.